Thank you. Special greetings to President Carlos Alvarado Quesada and Mrs. Claudia Dobles, First Lady of the Republic of Costa Rica. Ms. Maimouna Mohd Sharif, Global Executive Director of UN Hábitat, and Ms. Alicia Barceña Ibarra, Executive Director, Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. I also want to recognize distinguished organizers and members of the Urban Housing Practitioners Hub, ministers, local authorities, and corporate leaders. Welcome also to representatives of housing authorities, civil society organizations, academia, international agencies, and Habitat for Humanity organizations. I'm delighted to be with you as we examine what we can do together in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, which has made the need for adequate shelter so much more critical worldwide. It quickly became obvious last year that the novel coronavirus was going to impact people all around the globe. Latin America and the Caribbean has suffered, and continues to suffer, tremendous losses. As a result of COVID-19, 44 million people in LAC became unemployed, the largest increase since the global financial crisis of 2008. Most of those who lost their jobs were women, young people, and workers with lower skill sets. The number of people living in poverty reached 2005 levels, and extreme poverty numbers returned to roughly the same situation as in 1990, with 96 million people living on less than $1.90 a day. In LAC, the gross domestic product per capita is the same as in 2010. A decade of progress has been lost. From the beginning, the message from public health officials was clear: stay home to stay safe. But what about those who live in unhealthy conditions that actually make them sicker? Those who are crowded into too small places have suffered worse outcomes in terms of transmissions and death than those who live in healthier homes. Balakrishnan Rajagopal, UN Special Rapporteur on Adequate Housing, said in the context of COVID-19 that overcrowding or having inadequate access to water and sanitation has become a death sentence, handed out predominantly against poor and marginalized communities. Research done in 2020 by a group led by Lorenz von Seidlein says that living spaces have historically played a key role in the control of epidemics. Radical urban improvements made during the Renaissance, including the clearing of squalid and cramped living quarters, came about after the Second Plague. And cholera outbreaks in the 19th century led to the urban renewal of Paris. Even those of us who are deeply invested in housing can find ourselves processing information from a distance. However, when rising cases of COVID-19 and lives lost came to our front doors, the issue of safe and healthy housing became personal. Nonetheless, for those of us who have assets, who can work from home, and who have knowledge-based jobs, staying at home to stay safe has been more of an inconvenience than a crisis in terms of the ability to do our work. But the situation is far different for many service workers who lost their jobs, and for those who continued to go to work day after day when they felt like it put their health at risk. Still others sought to eke out a living through informal labor markets. The economic fallout of the health emergency has meant that families haven't known if they could remain in their homes, or even if they could feed their children. We were already experiencing a devastating housing crisis prior to the pandemic. Now things are exponentially worse. According to the United Nations, 1.6 billion people worldwide live in homes with qualitative deficits. In LAC, the housing deficit affects around 40% of the population. It's important to note that unlike in other parts of the world, the need for housing improvements in LAC is far greater than the need for a new house. If anything good has come out of the health crisis, it's that more people around the world became aware of how critical adequate and affordable housing is to family and community health. In an effort to build on that realization and global concern, Hábitat began an intense response to the pandemic back in March of 2020. We launched a global campaign called Homes, Communities, Hope, plus You, to provide necessary tools for vulnerable families to protect themselves from the coronavirus. We provided hygiene and primary needs kits, installed public hand washing stations, provided water access in communities, and created online courses about housing and health. For example, thanks to the support of donors and the PepsiCo Corporation, 310 public hand washing stations installed in Brazil enabled 90,000 people to have daily access to soap and water. One community, called Vila Nova Esperança in Sao Paulo, now has 3 public hand washing stations set up in high traffic areas. These stations, especially the one at the entrance to the community next to the bus station, are extremely important. When people return from work and enter the community, they already have a place with soap and water to wash their hands. COVID-19 has forced us not only to acknowledge the vulnerability of those lacking decent housing, but also to realize the interconnectedness in our society. The lack of decent and safe housing experienced by more than 20% of the world's population affects us all. Therefore, we must examine the reasons why families are not able to improve their housing situations. We must peel back the layers of systems, societal norms, trends, and disruptions that allow limiting conditions to persist and grow. Then, with a focus on people, we can better understand and reduce those barriers and look at housing solutions through the lens of helping families and communities thrive. But measuring the impact of housing is not always simple. The significant health effects of living in better housing are not as well understood by people who've never experienced inadequate housing. At Hábitat, we've recently made a deep commitment to articulate and measure the long-term impacts of housing improvements. Having quantifiable information will be crucial as the world seeks to reach the Sustainable Development Goals. None of us can do this work alone. To be effective, we will need to be humble in the way that we pursue change, intentionally reaching out and creating partnerships if we're going to see lasting impacts. For both emerging economies and more mature markets, creating additional opportunities for housing that is safe, healthy, and affordable is going to be key as we emerge from the pandemic and create a stronger global economy. Investments in healthy, secure housing also will help alleviate the overcrowding that makes communities more vulnerable to threats such as COVID-19. The good news for many is that the housing sector is an important source of employment and income generation. However, many construction laborers work informally and with limited employment protection that makes them particularly vulnerable to the fallout from economic recession that is affecting the aftermath of the health crisis. We must raise awareness of housing as a significant contributor to national economies. In a report commissioned by Hábitat, researchers at the University of Washington and the University of Pennsylvania found that emerging economies struggling to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic may be significantly underestimating how much their housing sectors contribute to the gross domestic product, and, as a result, may be missing opportunities for economic and social revival. When the researchers included often overlooked components of the housing market, such as the incremental building that prevails in the informal sector, they found that housing actually accounts for up to 16.1% of the GDP on average across 11 low and middle-income countries analyzed. That places housing on par with sectors such as manufacturing that often draw far more attention in economic recovery plans. Yet of the 196 countries that have developed an economic response to the pandemic, only 22, or 11%, have explicitly included housing components in their plans, according to the International Monetary Fund. Continuing to create and employ specific housing finance strategies to help low-income families will be critical. A recent assessment of 289 microfinance client households in the Philippines revealed that families with home-based income during the pandemic were much more likely to have used their loans for home improvements, suggesting that upgraded shelter better enables people to earn income from home. Another key issue worldwide will be to advocate for land tenure policies. Studies indicate that having title to land provides a variety of benefits. For example, research done by Harvard economist Erica Field found that land titling in the urban slums of Peru is associated with a 68% increase in the rate of housing renovation done within only 4 years of receiving a title. Similarly, a study done by researchers in Maryland and Argentina shows that the possession of land titles in a suburban area in Buenos Aires significantly affects incentives to invest in housing construction. Their results indicate that the proportion of houses with good quality walls and roofs rises by more than 40% under land titling. Another study done by the same researchers shows that land titling can have direct effects on health, since families who have the security provided by proper titles may invest in water and sanitation improvements, treatment of garbage disposal, better heating and air ventilation systems, and other improvements. Recognizing these benefits, Hábitat has sought to help families in places like Jamaica gain secure tenure. Approximately 1/4 of the population in that country live in 700 informal communities, mostly in urban areas. A pilot project implemented through our global advocacy campaign, called Solid Ground, sought to help low-income families who couldn't afford to go through the long, complicated, and expensive process previously required to secure land tenure. Hábitat recommended changes to the government system and created tools that resulted in an average savings of $550 per family, which was 44% less than the cost of the old system. The new plan also reduced the time needed to work through the land tenure process by almost 50%. In an initial assessment, the majority of families indicated that they would spend more on housing if they were sure they had secure tenure. The savings would allow families to improve their living conditions, which impacts both individual and community resilience. The need for semi-skilled workers, for digitizing enumeration and verification tasks has created job opportunities, which is a win-win. Using community members to gather information and prepare applications for secure tenure is more cost-efficient. In Portmore City, 10,000 people have been impacted by the pilot, and system changes can potentially impact over 675,000 individuals nationwide. Officials hope the changes will trigger more effective investment in housing. We have much for which to be grateful, and much that we can celebrate, but we still have a lot of work to do if we are to meaningfully impact the housing crisis in communities across LAC. The world is anxiously awaiting more widespread availability of vaccines that will allow us to resume more normal lives. But we must take steps in the meantime to create and sustain healthy communities. The pandemic has forced the world into a great reset. We have been anticipating and working hard towards plans for a new normal in a post-COVID-19 world. We are seeing that day on the horizon. Some families, communities, and parts of the world are having a harder time seeing the vision than others, however. The rest of us must step up. Hábitat is part of a coalition that is doing an advocacy mini-campaign to encourage the wealthy countries of the world to share the vaccine globally. Both practically and morally, everyone in the world needs to be vaccinated. It can't just be some places and some countries, so we are pushing for generosity. We must all commit to a forward-looking posture and begin putting into action the strategies we've had plenty of time to develop and examine. But we are stronger together, so my question is this: how can those of us gathered for this forum work together toward the shared goals that many of us seek? What steps can we take to build upon the knowledge and successes of each other so we can draw nearer to a world where everyone has a decent place in which to live? My prayer is that this time next year, we will be celebrating a healthier world and more families and communities made stronger by holistic housing improvements. Thank you.